In the next section of the DVD, we're going to look at arm rigs. Arm rigs can be done in many different ways. There's just a straightforward FK arm. We can do IK, FK switching arms, auto clavicle setups, arm twisting solutions, or all of the above really, all mixed together. For this intermediate series, I want to concentrate on the biggest problem that you see with rigging an arm and shoulder area in 3D. And that's crushing of the mesh as the arm twists and goes through its complex set of motions. Starting with the forearm in the human body is actually set up with an ulna and radius bone, so two bones laying parallel to one another. And when the wrist rotates along its length, it actually twists these bones. Because we have muscles and skin that slide over top of muscles, we get a twisting action in our forearm. Without getting into complex muscle setups and skin sliding solutions with plugins and whatnot, just to try and get a straight character to be able to rotate its hand over in an animation without twisting and butterflying the forearm into a pretzel, we need to come up with a solution that is fast to set up and will work well with straight skinning. In this case, what I've done is I've actually taken multiple bones in the forearm and I've set them to twist a little bit. What I'm going to do now is just turn off the modeling I've done on the bones, and you can see the bone setup as it works. This is the regular IK setup for the arm, and then there are these twist bones that are added in. These twist bones, you can see, do a little bit of twisting action, but the original arm bone doesn't do any at all. And just turning them back on here again. The next problem is the upper arm. The upper arm, if you place your finger on top of your shoulder on your upper arm bone and then rotate your upper arm bone along the x-axis of what a bone would be, you'll actually notice that the bones on your arm, the muscles in your arms there, don't move and twist with the bones much. They actually stay quite still near the top. That means that the shoulder area actually only needs to rotate around two axes. It doesn't need to do a twist right at the shoulder. And that's right up in this area. So if we add twist bones in the upper arm, we can get a similar effect again, where we can soften the deformation here. It doesn't have to deal with a twisting around this joint, because the first bone in the system doesn't do any twisting at all. The second one twists 50%, and then the original arm bone handles the full amount of twist down by the elbow. This means we're going to get a lot less problems when we're trying to skin this area. You'll be able to twist your arm and raise it above your head without this just becoming flattened like a pancake. You then need a clavicle control for raising your clavicle, so it's impossible to actually raise your hand like this. And unfortunately, I see a lot of beginner animators doing this. You actually have to raise your clavicle to be able to do that. So once again, you can actually limit how the skinning needs to take place there, knowing that there's a limitation on what the joints can actually do in the human body. The arm twisting is going to solve a lot of our issues and problems, though, in this next section. All of these point helpers are just going to prove to get in my way at this point, so I'm going to select them all, filter, and hide the selection. I almost always build my arm bones in the top viewport because I can see about where everything is. I also want to keep the bone system laying flat. You'll see why in a minute. So create system bones. I'm going to start with the clavicle bone, to the shoulder, to the elbow, and to the wrist, and I'm going to stop there for now. They've now been built along the ground plane, so I need to move the clavicle up in place. I've actually seen a lot of beginner riggers completely leave out the clavicle bone for some reason. But in fact, it's actually impossible to raise your arm like I've shown above your head without it. And it's very necessary to have it there. I have seen rigs, however, where the shoulder bone is just left as a positional change. And for really cartoony characters, that can be dealt with quite easily and gives you a lot of latitude. I find often, though, it's better just to deal with the rotation at the clavicle, and you can still be able to grab this and move it if you wanted with the correct setups. Set your clavicle joint to where your clavicle should be. And then set your shoulder joint to where it should be. Now the problem is we are unable to change the length of the bones currently. I'm going to double click on the root of the arm, and in the bone tools I'm going to turn off freeze length for now. This tool just allows us to be able to stretch the bones while moving them. Looks to me like the shoulder should be about there for this character. This is going to be an IK arm. One thing we want to make sure we do is that we don't change the fact that these two bones are in line when in the front viewport. The elbow only wants to rotate around this axis, so at no time do we ever want to get a position where our arm joint is actually set up like this or this in the character. Simple reason being is the IK solver will only solve around a single IK plane, and we want it to be this plane. If it's set up with a bit of a bend this way, it'll naturally want to bend up a little bit as well. Pull the elbow down into place. Place it approximately where the elbow should be. Then pull the wrist down into place. Get it approximately where it should be. Now, it doesn't matter if your character was designed a little odd and had sort of a bit of a bow in the arm, but still had to bend forward the same. It doesn't really matter where this joint ends up so much on this axis here. It just matters where it is looking down on the top of the arm, that it's going to bend in the correct spot. It does matter, however, where the wrist ends up, because the wrist is going to rotate around 3 axes, and we don't want it actually in a position where it's in the wrong placement and it isn't rotating correctly. If we want to move the wrist up and down to correct it, we really should go back to the elbow and do it. We can deal with the wrist on the other 2 axes without a problem, though. Well, that looks pretty good. We actually still have a bit of a bend in these 2 bones. I'm going to double click on them, pick bone tools, edit bone mode this time, and rotate along the local plane, local X axis of the bone, and twist them so they're directly facing the camera. To be honest, it wouldn't have mattered that much if I left them like this. We could have dealt with it, but you really don't want to. Your rig should be obvious and clean the way it's set up. Because we've stretched the bones to get them into place, you should pick them all now and say reset stretch, and you can actually watch this one, it'll pop the most. And that sets the bones back to their default sort of size and shape. It's best to always do that, so that I don't accidentally grab it, move it, and stretch them some more. I'm going to freeze the length again. It's not necessary, but I have a tendency to do it anyways. The next thing we're going to need is just a hand bone. We're going to need the hand bone because we're going to be driving the rotations based off of it. So we'll start the main hand bone now anyhow. I'm just going to make a quick little bone, and I'm going to use my align tool and align it up to the nub on the end, pivot to pivot, X, Y, and Z rotations. And once again, in the bone tools, freeze length, and I might just want to set the length a little bit longer. Again, if you've done that, reset the stretch afterwards. The twist bones, we're going to do a simpler setup. I'm going to do 2 twist bones in the forearm and 1 twist bone in the upper arm. I'm just going to do a copy of this bone here. You could make a new one if you wanted. And again, using the bone tools, if I'm going to change the length of this, I'm going to need to unfreeze the length, and I'm going to create an end so I can change its length. Once again, I'm going to reset the stretch, and now I'm just going to align it back to the original bone. So it sits in the same place. For the forearm, I'm going to copy the forearm bone, unfreeze the length, create an end on it, and I'm actually going to need 2 bones here, so I'm just going to refine this in the middle. And set their length. What I want is this to be about a third, and then the last piece of this bone a third. Now, you don't need to change the length of this bone. You don't need to actually set it down to here. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to skin this area to it. The envelope will run the entire length. If you don't like that happening, what you can do is you can actually change the length of this bone. And there's a couple of ways of doing it if you'd like to make it look really neat and tidy. One, you can use MaxScript to adjust the .length property, or in a very, very easy way is you can add an edit mesh modifier to it. Pick the vertices on the end, set your coordinate space to parent, and just move the vertices up in the bone. The bone length is actually still down at the end, but you've just changed it visually. When using skin and you add this as a skin object, the envelope will only come up the length of this because it actually uses the bounding box to decide that. Same thing with this bone. Maybe you only want it to actually start here and come down. Same thing, let's add an edit mesh. This time, grab the vertices on this end and pull them down. I don't like collapsing my bones down to an edit mesh and doing it, for the simple reason is I like keeping them as bones. If I ever need to go back and edit bones as bones, I can do it. I also have the ability to be able to turn off any changes I've made to them to see what the actual structure was built like. So now we actually have the bones in the arm that are going to allow us to create the twisting. This bone, this bone, this bone, and the nub bone at the end are the original bone chain that we started with. That can be seen by double-clicking on the root, and it picks only those. Again, it's better seen if we turn off the modifiers, and you can see how it actually is working. This bone is going to try and stay aligned to the clavicle in its X rotation. This bone will stay aligned in the X-axis to the clavicle. These two will split the load for the forearm. This one will try and stay aligned in the X-axis to the hand, and this one will share something in between this and this one.